Hello, Garland Nixon here. We're hanging out with our good friend, Caleb Maupin. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we're hanging out with the one and only Caleb Maupin. All right, let's hear it from Caleb Maupin. All right, folks, let's get going. There's a lot going on. You've got an election going on, and let's start here. I do want to, because I'm looking right now. Let's see, Mamdani's at 50.2%, Cuomo 40.8, Curtis Sliwa 8.2, Eric Adams 0.2%. Hold it up the rear. I gotta say this. It's like all mixed here for this reason. Mamdani has had a somewhat anti-Zionist, but it's taken anti-Zionist positions, and I feel that it's good for someone to take anti-Zionist positions. So that's a good thing. Okay. Conversely, I'm seeing that crap from him that you see from these democratic socialists, be they Bernie or AOC, who are mealy-mouthed imperialists, who as soon as you point to, okay, so yes, he's going to say Zionism is bad and the committing a genocide is bad. Well, that's pretty much low-hanging fruit. I mean, let's face it, if you're not opposed to genocide, there's something really, really wrong. So, and I'm not here to beat up on Mamdani. I'm just here to give you my thoughts, Caleb. And that is, I'm going to be watching him. I think he's going to win. I'm pretty sure he's going to win. But I'm going to be looking because, I heard him, Cuba, the Cuban leader and the Venezuelan leader, they're not, the CIA talking points. They're oppressing the voters, which is a lie. So he's telling things that are absolutely untrue. And so I ended up walking away saying, I'm getting this Obama Trump feeling where they promise a lot of stuff and then they get in office and then they drift on all over to, okay, I got your vote now. Let me try to play, in this instance, maybe try to kind of walk that line between being anti-imperialist. But however, when it comes to this particular issue, the CIA and the government's right, but they're wrong about, I've just got a terrible taste in my mouth. Talk to me about that, Caleb.
Well, I'm a New Yorker. I did vote today, and, I've spent a lot of time late at night wondering how would I vote? Because on the one hand, I can't stand the Israel lobby. I can't stand all the cheap shots the media is taking at him. They're ridiculous. The latest one I saw, this was the greatest one. This was in the New York Post today. They said, a group with ties to terrorism, big supporter of Mamdani. I thought, oh, wow, they got Al-Qaeda backing Mamdani. No, the group is the Council of American Islamic Relations. And I'm just like, oh, God, you know what I mean? Like one of the biggest Muslim groups in America. But, they criticize Israel. They met with, the Palestinians one time. So clearly they're tied to terrorism. Oh. They're supporting Mamdani. I mean, it's going to be another 9/11 if he wins. That's so ridiculous and stupid. But on the other hand,
the UN had the Syrian guy there, so the UN supports terrorism. Actually, supports an ISIS terrorist who had a $10 million bounty on his head.
Yeah, the guy had a bounty on his head. He danced on 9/11, and he's like being embraced by the U.S. government right now. So, but I saw the attacks on him, and the attacks on him are so bad. And I was walking down the street yesterday in New York City, and I looked up at the sky. There was a plane flying above. And it had, like a message, behind it. And it said, save New York City, stop the socialist. And I was just like, are you kidding me? So part of me feels like, hey, I should vote for him just to oppose that. But on the other hand, I listen to what he's saying. And I don't want to live in a New York City that's going to keep getting worse economically. While everyone says, oh, look, we tried socialism. We tried anti-imperialism. We nominated a literal Muslim socialist guy to run the city, and he put it in the shitter, and that's what communism and socialism is. And that's, I don't want to live with that. And plus, the big issue right now is Venezuela. The USA is on the brink of going to war around it. He said absolutely nothing other than, I think Maduro's a dictator. He's awful. I mean, that doesn't make me want to vote for the guy. And, I mean, so I'm not telling how I voted. I honestly think a very strong case could be made for voting against him, and a very strong case could be made for voting for him. And he's probably going to win regardless of how I voted. So I'm just not telling how I voted. I'm keeping it a secret. My wife knows, but there you go. But other than that, I will say, he's not really opposing the establishment. And I'll tell you how I know that. I campaigned for Charles Barron, who is a great man, someone I really look up to. He was on the New York City Council when I first moved to this city, representing East New York, former Black Panther, has a picture of Lenin in his office. He's now in the New York State General Assembly. He wears an African, suit, not with a collar, but like an African suit, right? When Robert Mugabe would come to the United Nations, he would use his position at the city council to rent a room, and have a reception for him at the New York City Council at New York City Hall. He was a personal friend of Gaddafi, did the same thing for Gaddafi. I met Charles Barron on many occasions. And when he was running for the House of Representatives, there was a good chance he might win. The outgoing guy endorsed him, and I campaigned for him. I was in the streets of Brooklyn campaigning for him, and I never saw anything like it. Barack Obama had a robocall, "Do not vote for Charles Barron." They had posters all over Brooklyn with pictures of Mao and Stalin and Gaddafi. What do all three of these people have in common? They're admired by Charles Barron. He's, and they just pulled out all the stops against Charles Barron. And then the icing on the cake was the day of the election. David Duke, the white supremacist, made a video for his website saying he supported Charles Barron. So the front page of the New York was David Duke supports Charles Barron. And David Duke said, well, I support him because he supports the Palestinians, which means he hates Jews, and I hate Jews too. And it was completely a setup. And I have never seen them just line up against a guy politically. So he didn't win the House of Representatives. However, he's still in the New York State General Assembly because he has a really solid organization of people behind him. The December 12th movement, which is like a Black nationalist Marxist group that's here in New York City. It's got roots in Harlem and all of that. They go out and they knock doors for him, and he'll be in office until he dies. I mean, in East New York, he's got a base of people that really look up to him in East New York, and he has prevented gentrification in East New York, but they're never going to let him be in the U.S. Congress. They're never going to let, Charles Barron, he was in Florida with the Uhuru case, and he actually went down and advised Uhuru and how they could run their campaigns. Charles Barron is someone I admire. He's a real anti-imperialist, and they pulled out all the stops against him. Whereas with Mamdani, they're all pretty much endorsing him. Barack Obama said he didn't exactly endorse him. He said, well, I'll call him up. I'll be a sounding board for his ideas.
Boy, that's great.
Yeah, they're letting him, they're giving him good coverage in the press. The right-wing hysterical coverage is just, silliness, but there's no like critical coverage in the mainstream press and all this. It's not an uphill battle, right? And he's in with AOC, and his wife was heavily involved in regime change activism, and he's on the wrong side internationally. That's really clear to me. I feel like it's going to make it much more difficult for me to get my message out there because, look, for me, I've spent years. The whole reason I got interested in all this stuff, I was a young kid and I grew up in the 90s, and everyone told me communism's failed everywhere it's ever been tried. And I started to read about communism, socialism, and I thought it was interesting, but I guess it had failed everywhere it had ever been tried. So I went to the library and I got a book called The Revolution Betrayed by Leon Trotsky. And I thought this book will show me maybe how there's a different kind of socialism or something that might work or something like that. And the first chapter was nothing but statistics about how the Soviet Union had the world's largest power plants, how the Soviet Union produced more steel than any other country in the world, about how they completely electrified, wiped out illiteracy. That's the first chapter. Is called What Has Been Achieved. And I thought this can't be true because everybody knows socialism just never worked. It just never worked. And I went and checked the data and it was true. And then I was angry. I was like, I've been lied to because what everybody knows about communism is it just never worked. And, China is the second largest economy in the world and millions of people were lifted from poverty. And I've been lied to. And that started me down a rabbit hole that got me, working for Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General. I was involved before that in struggles against police brutality in Cleveland, and then I was part of Occupy Wall Street. And one thing, I'm traveling to Iran and going to anti-imperialist conferences and going to Russia, and I'm now an anti-imperialist. So for me, it's all about anti-imperialism, and it's about defending the fact that this idea that this is the best we got, right? This is the end of history, this capitalist system, this rule of the world by big bankers, and everywhere that's ever opposed it has been an evil regime that just starved everybody. That's just not true. And so if people are socialists and their message is somehow going along with that narrative, I just have very, very little patience for that, right? If you're not willing to stand up and say, no, Gaddafi was a great man who supported the Black Panthers and supported Nelson Mandela and provided the highest life expectancy in Africa and built the world's the great man-made river that made Libya the world's largest irrigation project. And if you're not willing to stand up to that and say that what Obama did by destroying Libya was awful, if you're not willing to say the Soviet Union may have had its flaws, but they achieved an awful lot and they were brought down because they were never given a moment of peace, I really have a hard time with any kind of socialism that goes along with the overall imperialist narrative, but just says, we ought to give people free buses or something. So I have my own personal bias. There you go.
Well, I'll put it like this. And after Obama, after Bernie, I supported Bernie and oh boy, he's great and all that. And then, next thing I know, Bernie's like, we've got to vote for Hillary. We've got to stand up against Putin. We got to stand up against, and I'm like, I can't find a CIA talking point that Bernie really ever pushes against, right? And I'm like, I don't care if he calls himself a democratic socialist. I don't care if he talks about things that he wants to do. You cannot separate the foreign imperialist foreign policy. You can't separate the 1,000 bases, 900 bases all around the world from the economic pain that the American people are feeling. Yep. And if you're going to say, I want to mitigate the economic pain, but hey, everything we're doing overseas is fine, we need to keep doing that. Well, guess what? That's a waste of time. So I'm wondering, after he gets elected, if it's going to be the Obama game, you know what I mean? Where a week later, it's like, oh, wait a minute, he's got a bunch of Zionists in his cabinet. Oh, wait, he's starting to say things. You know what I mean? We shall see. I don't trust him, but who knows? Maybe I will be pleasantly surprised right now. We shall see.
Well, another thing on Bernie, a couple of things. First of all, at one point, Bernie did take decent international positions. In the 80s, he went to Nicaragua and stood with Nicaragua. He went to Cuba. He was, saying nice things about the Soviet Union. And then in the 90s, the first thing was he supported the bombing of Serbia. And it got to the point that local peace activists who had campaigned for him were going to his office and getting arrested. He and Michael Parenti stopped being friends after that. And he supported the bombing of Serbia. And he spent his whole campaign when he was running for president, he spent his whole campaign kind of, saying, well, and apologizing for having taken anti-imperialist positions at one point in his life, in his early career in the 80s. And what's interesting about all of that is that it didn't help him. And, first of all, they stole the election from him in 2016. And he didn't have to talk about Stalin or Mao or anything. He could have just stood up on that point. He could have just said, look, they stole it from me. And when he ran his campaign again in 2020, it was almost like he forgot that they stole it from him. He didn't bring that up. He never mentioned it. And then when he ran his campaign again in 2020, before the pandemic, shut down the election, basically, 60 Minutes ran a hit piece on him about how he'd supported all these dictators. It didn't matter, right? Even though he apologized for it and changed his position, it didn't matter. It's pretty wild. The whole thing is particularly wild. And, I mean, Bernie Sanders, people say he played the role of a sheepdog, right? He just, got people who are disgusted with the Democrat Party back into voting for the Democrat Party. And the other thing is that people would rather listen to Bernie than some mainstream Democrat. That's why Fox would have him on, because of the ratings, right? Fox, they don't agree with him. They're coming from more of a conservative perspective, but he says what average Democrats think. But, on the other hand, the Democratic Party governs very, very differently than that. And, Mamdani's not even getting the Bernie Sanders treatment. The only people screaming about him are Republicans. It's the Democratic Party, the machine here. They're going to let him get in there. And that makes me think something's wrong. And I just, you can tell when the establishment is lining up, and that doesn't mean you can't win, right? People can can win against all odds, like, you know, Charles Barron, who's been in Congress, in the House of the New York State General Assembly and was in the city council for so long. So, you know, and George Galloway, right? He's been in the British Parliament, right? And they've done everything to him. They kicked him out of the Labour Party. They, you know, but he gets in every so often. He's, you know, in the British Parliament. You can win. We're not saying that anyone who wins is a sellout just because they win. We don't want to get into that mindset. There's a lot of that on the internet. We don't want to go there. But in this case, Mamdani looks like he's got the stamp of approval from the highest levels of power. He's got a great smile, though. You know, he's got that smile, and he'll keep smiling. And I don't think we're going to get anything. And the worst part is that, you know, people that are in favor of free market policies will be able to look at New York continuing to deteriorate and say, oh, that's socialism. I'm seeing a lot of bad economics, you know, in relation to the SNAPS program, right? I saw this meme going around that said the reason the price of food is so high is because 42 million people get it for free. And I saw that and I said, no, actually, the US government buys millions of dollars of cheese every year and buries it in a cave just to keep the price of dairy high enough that the farming sector doesn't collapse. So it's not food stamps that's causing high food prices. That's absolutely ridiculous. And that, you know, and that there's a lot of bad economics. You know, that seems to be this thing that people on the right believe. If you just get the government out of the economy, you just privatize everything, capitalism in the market will just magically solve things. That is not the truth. And unfortunately, a lot of the people that are at odds with the status quo right now really buy into that. I mean, if libertarianism was the answer, take a look at Argentina right now. How are they doing? How's that, right? If we just privatize everything, are we going to get a good solution? I don't think so.
Yeah, you'll get a $40 billion bailout. It's great. That's the way capitalism works. You know, if you or me start a business and the business goes goes under, it goes under. If you start a bank or some kind of a, you know, some multi-billion-dollar company, and you violate the law and run it under, the government just comes out and says, hey, how much you need? Oh, you're in another country. Who cares? We can't give free buses to the people here because we got to give $40 billion to Argentina. At any rate, let's move on. The MAGA Civil War. Very, very interesting. I've been following that. I don't know a lot about the MAGA people, but here's what I know. Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, some other people, some people who I even find distasteful, but who cares about that? Right now, there is an element. Let's just say this. The Republican Party, for all of its right-wing crap, is far healthier as a political entity than the Democratic Party. It is healthier, right? Even though they want to take us in the wrong direction, just from the perspective of a party, the Democratic Party, you just see, look, Schumer and what's his name? Hakeem Jeffries walking around. He's always got that deer in the headlights look. They don't know what the hell to do, right? And they're just wandering and aimlessly. At least there's somebody fighting in the Republican Party saying, hey, we ain't down with Zionism and we're here to fight. Good. And so I think that your thoughts on that, the MAGA Civil War right now over Israel, but it's also kind of over foreign policy. You know, you had the same people there, the Tucker Carlsons, et cetera, who didn't want to go to war with Iran and who don't want to go to war with Venezuela or attack Venezuela. So perhaps it's not just Zionism. There's something else going on here, and that's very healthy. I'm glad to see that. Your thoughts?
Well, Trump's approval rating right now is very, very low. It's very low. And there is a base of people that do support him, but among people that are not solidly on board with MAGA, Trump is not doing very well. And a lot of those solid MAGA people are people that are like Marjorie Taylor Greene, people that are, you know, Tucker Carlson fans that don't want foreign interventions. And part of the reason that they're starting to cool in their support for him is because Trump has been doing such big interventions. And that clip that went around of J.D. Vance just getting raked over the coals by a young MAGA guy for how beholden to Israel, you know, Trump clearly is, that was powerful. And that, you know, if Trump wants to be popular, he should pivot in a different direction. And we'll see. I mean, we're only a year in. So, I mean, he's got time, I guess. The midterms will be next year. And then he's got, you know, 2 more years and, you know, we'll see. But right now, Trump is very, very unpopular. And there is a fight within MAGA. I mean, Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene and some other people. I mean, they hold true to the overall MAGA narrative, America first, against globalism, kind of economic nationalism. They hate China. They're friendlier to Russia, but they really hate China. And they say, look, we've given Israel too much. Israel has too much power and control. This is a foreign country. And they're being ideologically consistent. And, Conservatism Incorporated, the Daily Wire, which is not long for this world. I think they're going under, right? And a lot of these outlets, they are just completely controlled. And Candace Owens, she's talked about this, how, that the money behind conservatism is tied up with pro-Israel stuff, and they will go after you and they will destroy your reputation if you were seen as critical of Israel. And I think a lot of people are seeing through it. There's a lot of anger. It manifests itself in very strange ways. And I obviously don't endorse everything that's being said, and I'm sure you feel the same way. But, people can see this. And this has been the unspoken reality for a long time. But we're finally getting to the point that people are seeing. I mean, Israel just continues its murderous crimes against the Palestinians without any regard. They killed 100 Palestinians because they were mad that the dead body of someone who was already dead wasn't returned quickly enough. I mean, you can't get more blatantly. I mean, they're not interested in peace at all. And I mean, it's indefensible. And at this point, a lot of people in the conservative side are waking up. Now, one thing I really wish could happen is that the left protesters would welcome those people to join their movement. Wouldn't it be great if all the Marjorie Taylor Greene fans and Tucker Carlson fans would team up with the Answer Coalition and the Jewish Voices for Peace, and they'd have rallies demanding an end to the U.S. support for Israel? But that won't happen because of this culture war stuff, and that the left elements that are controlling the Palestine protests, they are very, very opposed to any kind of alliance with the libertarian or isolationist right wing. And I think that's contrived from above. And I think that's why the Charlie Kirk stuff went the way it did on the internet. That's why, we saw all these people, they went viral cheering the death of Charlie Kirk. That was to traumatize all the conservatives to never want to work with leftists. And part of the reason that, then people were losing their jobs and all of that for cheering the death of Charlie Kirk was so that they would never work with conservatives. And that the establishment is very, very much invested in making sure that people from different demographics in this country that are opposed to the status quo don't come together around issues. Ideologically, they're never going to see eye to eye. Conservative Christians, socialists, and communists, they're just never going to get together. But when it comes to a policy that they would agree on, like not supporting Israel, like protecting free speech, like investing in this country instead of having wars around the world, I could see some real agreement. And that's what politics is about. And there's a big effort with social media to psychologically manipulate the public out of making sure such an alliance never happens.
Yeah. And I think that now, what we're seeing now is the Zionists, they're using the same, I'm going to be honest with it, the same knuckle dragging techniques that they're using on the ground in Gaza, in Lebanon, all throughout the Middle East, where it's like, we're going to bomb, we're going to attack, we're going to stomp, we're going to crush, kill, destroy. You're right. It's this knuckle dragging caveman mentality. And I insult cavemen. Okay. And now it's what's going on? Well, a lot of Americans are opposed to Zionism now and unhappy. Well, we'll have to crush them. We've got to crush Tucker. We've got to crush. It's one thing only. We got a sledgehammer. We're going to kill a gnat with a sledgehammer. We're going to beat these people to death. Well, it's not going to work. I'll tell you one thing, because, I was law enforcement. I worked around all conservatives, basically. 99% of the people were conservatives, right? And I'll say this. Yeah, don't push them. They're going to push back. The conservative community, you know what I mean? If you're like, okay, we're just going to run over them and we'll force them to all be pro-Zionist, that's a bad move, because they're going to fight back. They're going to say no. They're going to flip out. They're going to, they're in for a fight. And so I think that's good. I think that we're seeing the Democratic Party, that it's coming unglued good, because the ruling elite and the political class all want to continue to support Zionism, even though their constituency is completely opposed to it. And now we're seeing that same Zionist bacteria is infecting the Republican Party, and it's making that party sick too, and good. Oh, Mamdani won. Yeah, I just saw that a second ago.
Yeah,
He's
that was
officially
kind of
won, but
understood to
we'll
be the case.
see. We will see. I guess I can say good. I don't know. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. Give me a
Indeed.
month, right? And we may be on here saying some very upsetting things, or maybe not. Okay. Anyway, Caleb, back to
Well,
the
if you
MAGA
look at
Civil
the
War.
history of the two major parties in the United States, right? Throughout the history of this country, the beliefs of the two parties have changed a lot. But since they've been around, there's been one consistency, which is the Democrat Party is the party of the urban political machines. It is the Tammany
Yeah.
Hall machine in New York, the Rizzo machine in Philadelphia, the
Kansas
Gale
City,
machine. What's it called?
the Kansas City machine. Remember that guy? I can't think of his name.
Boss Tweed or something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah. Something.
Yeah,
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 I forgot.
yeah. I mean, it's the corrupt urban political machines on the one hand, and the Republicans were the party of the rural folks, farmers, people in the rural areas. Now, the South was in the hands of the Democratic Party during the period of Jim Crow segregation after the Civil War. Then it flipped after the changes in the 70s and such. But for the most part, Republicans are the party of farmers and rural people, and Democrats are the party of urban political machines. And even though their beliefs have changed, the Republicans, their weakness has always been fanaticism. Back in the days of Abraham Lincoln, they were fanatical abolitionists and fanatical religious Protestants. And a lot of the people who might have voted for them were kind of off-put by the fanaticism. And the weakness of the Democrats has always been, again, even though the beliefs have changed, that people just don't believe them. They don't deliver. They're just seen as machine, corrupt, bureaucratic, machines. And that has always been the case. And I think we're in a period where the Republican Party is kind of transitioning back into being almost closer to their roots. During the Cold War, the Republican Party, it kind of started out as there was this kind of fanatical anti-communism of like McCarthyism, right? And they lost control of McCarthyism. The U.S. government whipped it up, and they basically purged the American government of the Roosevelt wing of the Democratic Party that had been friendly to the Soviet Union. They threw Alger Hiss in jail. Henry Wallace was kicked out of the Democratic Party and had to run against Truman in 1948. But after a few years, McCarthyism morphed into something completely different. Like Joe McCarthy was accusing the FBI and CIA of being communist, and it was like kind of a middle class kind of thing where it was like, in the name of anti-communism, a lot of these small business owners and stuff were like railing against big corporations and the Rockefellers and all of this. And so Joe McCarthy, he got it, they revealed that he was gay and that he was, doing all kinds of stuff, and he got his reputation destroyed, drank himself to death. And then you transition into Cold War liberalism, where, the Democrats were in power. Eisenhower was a Democrat, basically, a Republican, but he kind of pushed the Republican Party away from that, kind of conservative fanaticism. And then you had Kennedy and Johnson, and the Cold War liberals came in. And with Nixon, you saw the Republican Party kind of reborn. They were no longer the party of fanatical McCarthyists anymore. They were the neocon party. They were just the party of the American establishment. And with Nixon, and Nixon himself was a little bit too much of a strong man. He was gotten rid of. Gerald Ford came in. It was Gerald Ford who brought in Dick Cheney, who just died today, brought him into the federal government. It was Gerald Ford who brought in Alan Greenspan to run, the Federal Reserve and all of that. And Ayn Rand came in and took the oath with him. She was with him at the White House when he took the oath. And Gerald Ford, they brought in the neoconservatives, and the Republicans were very much the party of the establishment. And that's how it was for most of my life, right? When we invaded Iraq, it was the Democrats had people questioning it, and Republicans were the people that said, if you question it, why do you hate our troops? Right? You're disrespecting the military. You just got to shut up and support the war and all of that. And the Republican Party was the party of the establishment, and the Democrats were a party that kind of gave play to people that were critical of the establishment. Well, now that's flipping again. And now we're in a period where the Democrats are again the party of the establishment, and the Republicans are the party that gives play to people that are critical of the establishment. What's interesting is right now, the Republican Party is considered a party of the right. It is a right-wing party in terms of economics, et cetera. But what's interesting is every so often they stray from the script. For example, I saw Marjorie Taylor Greene on The View talking about how we need a better healthcare system and how too many people, don't have healthcare. And every so often you hear Tucker Carlson say something where he says he doesn't believe in the free market. And I feel like what's eventually going to happen, and this is very odd, but it kind of fits the trajectory of, if you pay attention to world politics, the way things are going, The Democrats are going to be the party of the establishment, and the Republicans are gradually going to turn into a catch-all populist party. And I think that, give it 20 or 30 years, it's going to take some time, right? And I think a lot of it's generational. I think the Cold War generation is going to have to die out, but the Republicans are going to be the party of populism for lower income people. And in red states, lower income people tend to be quote unquote right wing. In urban areas, lower income people tend to be quote unquote left wing. But people that are populistic and opposed to the establishment will be in the Republican Party, and the political elite and the ruling party of the United States will be the Democratic Party. And that's kind of how I think it's going to be. The Democrats are becoming basically what the Republicans once were. They were the Republican Party during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. If you bought everything the establishment said, hook, line, and sinker, you were a Republican. And if you had questions about it, you were a Democrat. Now that's flipped. Now, if you buy everything the establishment says, hook, line, and sinker, you're a Democrat. And if you got questions about it, increasingly, you're a Republican. And the Democrats have made this happen because they accuse everyone who questions it, even in their own camp. Oh, you must be secretly a Republican. Tulsi Gabbard tried to be a Democrat. She was a Democrat from Hawaii in the House of Representatives. They wouldn't let her be a Democrat. So now she's a Republican and she's in the Trump administration. And that, this is kind of how world politics is going, I think, right? If you look at it, right, it's not so much a question of left versus right. It's a question of populist versus establishment versus globalist establishment. And that's where things are going. That's where the Republican Party will be in a generation or so. I think it'll take time, but that's my prediction. What do you think?
I think you're right. I think we're seeing, people forget that there have been political shifts and that it is possible. And I think you're right. What we're seeing is a political shift. And what we're seeing, it's interesting, though, what we're seeing happen with Israel and Zionism. It's interesting that the pushback against the Ukraine, the people who are saying there are a bunch of Nazis in Ukraine, the people who are telling the truth about why are we giving them that money? Why are we involved in that? Oh, that's Russia. We need to be friends with Russia. People that are bringing up, well, the Israelis are killing Christians. And wait a minute, the Russians are, fairly conservative, traditional family, and they're Republicans saying, well, we're kind of like that too. You know what I mean? So you're having people who are looking at politics in a more practical manner. Meanwhile, the Democrats are just running around with a bunch of blue and yellow friggin' flags. Yes, we will stand up against Putin. And when you ask them or try to debate or talk to them about Ukraine, they have barely a superficial understanding. The only thing they know is talking points. The old saying, they know the music, but they don't know the words, right? And so what's interesting, and you're seeing a Candace Owens, you're seeing a Tucker Carlson, who get into the nuance. Actually, sadly, they get into a nuanced discussion about these things, as opposed to Bernie, we got to stand up against Putin because he's a dictator. And you're like, I mean, that's what the CIA is telling me. I want some details here. No, you're not getting it. Anyway, your thoughts.
Yeah. It's interesting because in 2015, I think that was the last time that the Russian president came to the United Nations, right? I think 2015 was the last time that he came for the UNGA, if I'm not mistaken. And I remember the speech he gave to the UN General Assembly Hall was pretty deep. And one of the things he said in his speech is he said, well, America is starting to learn something that the Soviet Union learned, which is that you can't export your system all over the world. And I thought that was interesting, but it made me think the reason that we have like left and right is during the Cold War, communism basically defined the political spectrum. The Democrats were the anti-war party. The Democrats, because they were the left and they were closer to the Soviet Union. Communism was like the ultimate left. And so if you're left, you're closer to the Soviet Union. If you're right, you're really far from the Soviet Union. And so politics was kind of defined, and even global politics was kind of defined by communism. Are you with the communists, or are you with the people that are against the communists? And some of the people that were against the communists were radical Muslims, and some of them were military dictators, and some of them were free market capitalists. Whatever you were against the communists, you were on the American side. But if you're with the communists, you're with the Soviet Union, and eventually the communists started fighting each other and all of that. And now it's kind of reversed. Nowadays you have all these countries around the world that they just don't like this Western system. And, you got Iran, not capitalism, but Islam, Shia Muslims. You got, Bolivarian socialism in Latin America. You've got Russia, like the new Russian patriotism, the Orthodox Church, pride in the Soviet achievements, but also kind of a Russian nationalism and pride in their civilization. you've got China now, which is Marxist, socialism with Chinese characteristics, but also draws from Confucianism and all of that. And it's like, it's America, it's the Western system that is saying you're with us or against us. And there's all kinds of people over the world that are like, well, we're just not with you. So that kind of de facto puts us into the opposition camp. And that's kind of where we're at. It's the Western system that is kind of demanding the whole world line up with them. And how you relate to that global drive to spread Western values and free markets and free trade all over the world, how you relate to that defines your political thing. And that's why left and right is being reshuffled, because at this point, that globalism now presents itself as left, whatever the hell left means, right? That as they're spreading free trade around the world, as they're promoting regime change wars, they've got their rainbow flags, they've got their statements against systemic racism or whatever. So they're selling that in a left-wing way. And so then that makes everything kind of confused. It's no longer the Soviet Union, and communism doesn't define left anymore. So left is kind of in the hands of the West. And so it makes everything confused. And this is the kind of stuff, this is deep politics here. This is podcast stuff. This isn't front page kind of material, but that's what we're here for, right? We're smart guys and people appreciate us. And that's why they like to listen to us, is that we're digging into this stuff very deeply. And that, the terms left and right come out of the French Revolution. After the king was overthrown, the people that were embracing the revolution, they had the National Assembly, they sat on the left. And the people that were more conservative and still loyal to the king, they sat on the right. And left and right, what does left mean? It just means that you kind of fully embrace the ideals of the French Revolution. And right meant you had some reservations about it. That's basically what it meant. And that Karl Marx was somebody who was inspired by the French Revolution, but he saw that it didn't create a utopia. It didn't create an ideal society. And so there were various people throughout Europe that were saying, you know what? We need to go back to the drawing board here. We didn't create what we were setting out to create with the French Revolution. 1848, you had the Spring of Nations in Europe, kind of like the Arab Spring, but it was the Spring of Nations in Europe. Yep. Over 200 different uprisings all across Europe where people were rising up, inspired by the French Revolution, calling themselves Republicans. That's what they called themselves, Republicans, because they were fighting to create democratic republics. And the people that were part of those uprisings were called left. And the Communist League of Germany was one faction that was part of the German Revolution. They lost. Karl Marx got on a boat and got the hell out of there and got to London. And in London, he published this manifesto, the Communist Manifesto. And so that's why communism is considered left. But left is more about aesthetic. It's, the red flag comes from the red cap that the French revolutionaries would wear. And red is the color of what? Blood, right? That's violence, blood. It's also the color of sexual passion. It's also the color of anger, right? You wave, red at the bull and you get them to charge, right? And feudalism is a very restrictive system, right? If you're a peasant and you talk back to the noble, they cut your head off or something. You got to hold it in, right? And the color red became the color of the French Revolution and then the color of the left, because the message of the left was let it all out, unleash your rage, unleash your sexual passion, unleash your anger. You've been holding it in. This old order has been telling you to hold it in. We're telling you to let it out. That's kind of what leftism is. It is the libido unleashed. It is the Oedipal, the desire of a teenage boy to kill his father, the Oedipal impulse. That's kind of what leftism attached itself to. And I have really dug very, very deep. I've been reading these books by Reuben Osborne, a brilliant communist psychoanalyst from Britain in the 1930s. And during the 1930s, he writes these two books, Freud and Marx, A Dialectical Study. He writes another book called The Psychology of Reaction, where he's trying to understand why people are becoming Nazis and supporting Hitler. And he says, basically, we've got a problem as communists, is that we're appealing to people's deviant impulses, their desire to unleash their rage, their rage at their parents or whatever. And this is not a formula for winning. And the reason the fascists are winning, the fascists are evil, but they're appealing to people's healthier impulses, right? Loving your country is just as natural as loving one's parent. Why do they call it the fatherland or the motherland, right? And he's saying, look, if we're going to defeat fascism, we need to kind of reinvent the appeal of communism. We can't be just appealing to people's, left libidinal and Oedipal impulses. We need to appeal to brotherhood and national unity and all of that. And the communist movement, Stalin kind of reinvented the communist movement during the time of the Popular Front. And that's why, in America, they would always have big images of Abraham Lincoln, the father of the country, and say that we're the party of Lincoln. Just like Lincoln abolished slavery, we're going to abolish wage slavery. And that, it was about defending democracy from fascism, right? That fascism is un-American. I always tell people, you want to understand what the Communist Party was like at the height of their influence, when they had the most power and influence in the late 1930s and lead up to World War II. Watch Superman. Watch an old Superman cartoon, because Superman, the two guys who wrote the comic book, they were friendly to the Communist Party. And, Man of Steel in Russian, that's Stalin, right? And he fought the Ku Klux Klan, and he protected labor unions. He was for truth, justice, and the American way. And, Lex Luthor was this diabolical capitalist who was, greedy and all of that. And he was from a small town, in Kansas, right? And the Communist Party's leader during those years was a guy named Earl Browder, whose nickname was the Man from Kansas, right? And the Communist Party very much had this, like, we're fighting for everything that people believe in, freedom and anti-racism and economic opportunity and all of that. And that's when the Communist Party was very effective. And Trotskyism was the people who didn't agree with that. Trotskyism, which eventually became neoconservatism, was this layer of intellectuals who weren't comfortable with that. And they really liked this concept of the permanent revolution that Trotsky had dreamed up. And they eventually became the neoconservatives. They were alienated from that popular front. So there's a lot there, and this says a lot. And we think about the neoconservatives. Dick Cheney, Dick Cheney, who bit the dust just today. Dick Cheney, one of his last political statements, he said, the greatest threat to the American Republic that has ever been is Donald Trump. Interesting, isn't it? Interesting that he would say that, and it's like a lot of the people that rightly opposed what Dick Cheney did, torturing people, lying about it, getting us into a war. A lot of them agree with Dick Cheney about this, right? I mean, it's pretty wild. And like, that's what Tulsi Gabbard talks about. The same people who cooked up Russiagate cooked up weapons of mass destruction, right? That it's not the Democrats or the Republicans. It's about this kind of neocon apparatus that has taken control of U.S. foreign policy. And Dick Cheney was part of that. And, that apparatus was in the Republican Party when he was vice president. Now it's in the Democrat Party.
Right. Well, what you say, I've talked about that a good bit. And that is, these are people who, Vietnam, they migrated between parties, and then, oh my gosh, you guys want to leave Vietnam, we'll leave this. But, they just migrate between parties, and whichever one benefits them for their pro-war permanent revolution, or as we call it now, what are they? Forever wars. You know what I mean? They just go wherever the grass is greener for them. And, I was saying, during the Hillary, because that to me was one of the big things when Hillary was running, I was looking and I'm like, holy crap. Bill Kristol of the worst, Max Boot, all these people, they love Hillary. And I remember when somebody asked me, are you going to vote for Hillary? I said, let me tell you something. If I'm standing in line and I look over there and I see Max Boot and Bill Kristol, I'm in the wrong line. And at that point, I began talking. I did a video. The reason I'm on YouTube right now is because I did a video. It's on my YouTube channel. And it was in 2016 when Hillary was running. It was just a Facebook live video. And I talked about the Democratic Party transforming, and Hillary transforming it into, the Republican Party of George W. Bush. And back then, when nobody was doing it, got 30,000 views. Wow. It was an unbelievable, unthinkable number of views, right? And that just blew up everywhere. And that's when I thought, well, geez, maybe I can do some videos and talk about politics. Maybe people want to hear it. But I could so clearly see it. And when people watch it, they're like, holy crap, you're 100% right. It's right before our eyes. So now what you have is, and I think, doesn't it get back to what we were talking about? And that was, Hillary Clinton was the leading edge of the final transmutation, use that word, of the Democratic Party into turning it into, this is the party of George W. Bush from 2000 to 2006. That's exactly what the Democratic Party is. And in 2016, and in fact, in 2020, they had some of the exact same people, some of the exact same Republicans that spoke in 2006. Many of them spoke for the Republicans, spoke for the Democrats in 2020. So they just changed. Now let's talk about resistance. The resistance is interesting. What's happening is resistance is interesting. You know, I think that the Ukraine conflict really opened the door to the anti-imperial resistance worldwide movement that's going on now, in a way. I mean, it opened in the big, it slammed the door open. Yes, a lot of people had been resisting, but it slammed the door open, and the big fight started. We saw Iran capable of defending themselves very ably, and now we're seeing the threats against Venezuela and the Cuba, countries that have been resisting. Your thoughts on what's happening as far as Iran, Venezuela, Russia, resistance to imperialism?
Well, I'm really hoping that this de-escalation in Venezuela continues. I noticed that, Friday, Miami Herald came out, oh, they're about to strike. And then Trump said, no, we're not. And then Marco Rubio tweeted out, it's fake news. And now we're starting to see a de-escalation. And I really hope it continues, but we shall see. I mean, we really shall see. I was really hoping that Trump would meet with Kim Jong-un when he was in Korea. He didn't, but he did have a very productive meeting with Xi Jinping. And now apparently U.S.-China relations are at an all-time high. Now that's what the Trump administration is telling us, that they've patched it up. We're in a good spot. I certainly hope that's the truth. Things are in a very strange place right now, geopolitically. And Russia, that meeting in Budapest was supposed to happen. It was canceled, but it wasn't canceled. It was just kind of postponed. And Kirill Dmitriev was here, and he met, and they're talking about this Bering Sea bridge that's been in the works for hundreds of years, over 100 years at least. They've been talking about it. We came the closest under the Kennedy administration. They were going to build a physical bridge between the two little islands there that would then lay the basis for the tunnel under the Bering Sea. Let's see. Let's see. I mean, there's a huge amount of possibility right now, but also a huge amount of danger. Tulsi Gabbard's speech that she gave in Bahrain was very, very interesting. We republished it on the Center for Political Innovation website, because if people read the words of it, it's very carefully written. Like at one point she says, I'm only speaking for myself. She actually says that, which is very interesting, because in theory, she's the director of national intelligence. She should be speaking for the entire intelligence community. But she actually says, that's a quote from the speech, I'm only speaking for myself. That's interesting. So why did she say that? She's kind of throwing out to the world, not everybody in the intelligence community agrees. And then, I don't know if you saw, but the FBI, is furious about the fact that she is taking over counterintelligence investigations. Now that I saw, that made my jaw drop. So she's taking over counterintelligence investigations. She's taking that away from the FBI, which is her right. She's the director. She's their boss. But the FBI is furious, wrote a letter to the Congress. They do not want her taking over the counterintelligence, investigations. That's big. That is very, very big, right? That she's taken over counterintelligence investigations. And the FBI, even Kash Patel is director of the FBI. That's a Trump guy. Even he doesn't want her doing that. That's big. And I can only hope that it appears behind closed doors the narrative, I think it was Politico, came out and said it was Marco Rubio wanted to attack Venezuela, but Wyckoff, the negotiator guy, didn't. I have a feeling Tulsi Gabbard doesn't want to attack Venezuela, because there's videos that have come out. I mean, she made videos the last time Trump was in office saying, don't attack Venezuela. It's not our business, etc. She was saying that. And you'll notice they've been having her go on Fox News. And whenever they bring up Venezuela, she just kind of changes the subject and starts talking about, well, drug cartels are bad. And I mean, that's a fact. Drug cartels are awful. They're awful organizations. No one can disagree with that. But she's not out there cheering for war against Venezuela. The message that she put out in that speech, again, she was saying, well, President Trump feels this way, President Trump feels that way. But it's clear not everybody in the Trump administration feels that. And I don't think Trump necessarily does that. I mean, Trump, has no problem sinking these ships without any legal basis, bombing Iran. But she was saying Trump feels this way, Trump feels that way. But then she started out by saying, I'm only speaking for myself. There is a fight in the back room. And this is so, so important. Look, at this point, the Democrat Party is lost. They are completely lost. And a lot of the Republican Party and a lot of this administration is completely lost. But it looks like there is one sliver of hope. There is a faction within the Trump administration. And if we want to try to nudge the world in a good direction, we got to boost that section of truth. And people don't like that. People want to say, oh, Caleb, you're shilling for all of that. I'm telling you, we gotta find somebody who's good and boost them if we want to have an impact on the conversation. If you want to just be on the internet complaining, that's fine. But I want to change the world. And I'm telling you, I think that Tulsi Gabbard is capable of doing good. That's what I believe. And so we need to show that there is support for her on the streets of this country. We need to get that message out there. We need to do it. And, that's where I'm at. Look, if you want to understand how I see things, this is like a little pamphlet that I wrote, Divisions in the Ruling Class, Conflict Within the U.S. Elite from the Cold War to Today. Right. And I talk about, the Eastern establishment, the old money Eastern establishment versus the lower levels of capital, the cowboys. I quote the Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby and Carol Quigley's very good book, The Anglo-American Establishment. So there is a fight within the ruling elite that's been going on for a long time. And the hope that we have is to maneuver within this. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the sleeping giant is the American people. And, I really like in the Little Red Book, Mao Zedong says, the masses are the real heroes. We ourselves are often childish and ignorant. And I often tell people, you got to imagine there's a giant boulder that's going to roll down the mountain. We don't control that boulder, and we're not going to start it rolling. But once that boulder is rolling down the mountain, we might have the ability to nudge it in the right direction. And that's what we should strive to do, is that we can see that momentum it's building, and we can nudge it in a direction where it rolls in the right place. And that's what we can do. That's what we can strive to do. But it is going to be the masses of the American people in their millions who will make the future of this country. And the explosion is coming. It is coming. And I mean, the people are angry. They're voting for Mamdani. They're voting for Trump. They're out in the streets. It's only a matter of time. The American people are going to awaken because the conditions in this country are becoming intolerable, and people are ready. But where do they go? What do they do? We have the ability with our knowledge. We're not better than the people. We don't think that we're superior. We don't look down on the people. Oh, these people are sheep, but we're the enlightened ones. No. We have, with our unique understanding of all of this, we have the ability to kind of nudge the boulder that's coming down the mountain to push the coming explosion in the right direction. And I think that is a great opportunity that we've been chosen for. That's an important role in history, that we have the ability that we can nudge the explosion in the right direction. So we got to take that job seriously. And we got to not just say things because they're trendy and they'll get us views. We got to think seriously about what we say. And we got to build networks of people that are capable of getting out there and carrying out operations and educating people and doing what we can do. That's why my organization, we were at the inauguration with our big banner of Trump and Kim shaking hands. Only peace can make America great again. We handed out over 1,000 of these pamphlets that we gave to all the people that were there at Capital One Arena. That's why, we published, and they banned my book on Kamala Harris. We distributed it in bulk outside the Democratic National Convention. We're here to carry out operations and nudge the boulder because it's coming, right? And I wrote a book about Trotsky and the neoconservatives that exploded in popularity. I've got some big interviews about it coming up later this week, actually, because I saw that they were talking about it, right? Nick Fuentes and whatever, they're talking about Trotsky, and I've, spent my life in these groups and, the niche little inside baseball world of leftist politics. So I know this stuff, so I could contribute to the conversation. You got to find a way to be in the game, right? If you just stand on the outside complaining, or you just tail after whatever's trendy, that might get you more views. That might be a more comfortable, safe place, but you're not really changing the world. Changing the world means that you're kind of in touch with things and you're kind of trying to push them in the right direction. I talk a lot about, living biologically. How, an ant is alive, a weed in your garden is alive, but they're not making choices. They're not asking big questions, saying, why am I here? They just they respond to stimulation. They avoid pain. They seek pleasure. They just kind of go along. And that the elite of this world very much view human beings as just another animal. And they would like to reduce us to living biologically. But human beings have the ability to be, right? To make choices, to become aware of their environment, to ask big questions, and to consciously reinvent the world around them. And that's what's so unique and special about the human species. And so I seek to cultivate people to do that. That's why we're the Center for Political Innovation. Innovation means changing the world, seeing the environment around you and interacting with it. And that's Frederick Engels. He said that's what defines humanity. All other species simply interact with their environment, but mankind masters his environment. and by doing so, creates the world in his own image. That's a really amazing thing, and that's what gives me hope, and that's what we need to fight for. The elite would like to strip that away from us and reduce us to just having an animal-like existence, but I feel that human beings will fight for that human ability to challenge things and push the world in a better direction.
Caleb Maupin, everyone. Let's see, we got the Center for Political Innovation, if I can ever figure out how to get back to it. Oh, okay, here we go. There we go. The Center for Political Innovation, CPIUSA.org. Go there to find out about all Caleb's good works and all the fine stuff he's doing. Caleb Maupin, peace with Russia, peace with China, no World War III, no police state. There you go, CPIUSA. Also, you can go there and you can check out Tulsi Gabbard's important speech. And they've got the text from the speech. So thank you very much, Caleb. Certainly appreciate it. And, I'm on the way to the airport tomorrow.
All right.
Heading for Moscow and places like that. I'm looking forward to, you've been there on numerous occasions. So I'm sure I'll get to find out what you already know.
Bring a big coat. I would bring a big coat.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure of that. All right. Thanks. Look, I'm bringing my long johns and all that stuff. I'm gonna be ready for the cold.
Very good.
All right, everybody, go over to Caleb's channel and check him out and subscribe. If you're a member of this channel and you're not a member of Caleb's channel, you got to make that happen, and vice versa. If you're one of Caleb's guys, you come on, or girls, come on over and become a subscribe to my channel. Also, we're always doing a lot of good work together. Thanks a lot, Caleb. Thanks a lot, everybody. Don't forget, the most important thing you can do is share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.